Oh, spare me the logical male analysis. Karen's voice was dripping with sarcasm. This isn't an academic debate, Jake. This is real life, and your so-called rational vote has real consequences for women like me. Hey there, I'm Corin. I could barely sleep after the election results last night, and by morning my phone was buzzing non-stop with messages from Lisa and the others as we all tried to process what had happened. When Lisa suggested we gather at her place, I jumped at the chance. I needed to be with people who understood how I was feeling, not like Jake, who just sat there this morning calmly eating breakfast as though nothing had changed. I'm heading to Lisa's, I told him, struggling to keep the irritation out of my voice. He only nodded, his face wearing that same neutral expression that was driving me crazy. At least someone cares about what's happening, I muttered under my breath as I grabbed my coat. Lisa's living room was packed when I arrived. Emily paced the floor, her coffee going cold in her hand, while Sarah sat cross-legged on the rug, eyes red from crying, and Maria was typing furiously on her phone, probably another furious post on social media. The air in the room was charged, thick with a mix of anger and resolve. Can you believe how many men voted against us? Emily suddenly burst out, stopping her pacing. My own brother. He voted no, she said, putting air quotes around the word and sneering. Listening to everyone share their experiences, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about Jake, it was happening everywhere. Men who claimed to support women's rights but didn't vote when it really mattered. As we continued talking, the message became clear. We need to act, Lisa declared, her normally soft voice carrying a firmness I hadn't heard before. This passive, both sides stuff has to end. They can't just stay on the fence. Sarah wiped her eyes, sitting up straighter. My co-worker Rachel, she began, she's kind of on strike with her husband. If he won't support her beliefs, why should she keep supporting him? The room buzzed with the energy of this idea. Maria finally looked up from her phone. That's actually genius. Hit them where it counts. Make them realize this isn't just politics, it's personal. I thought about Jake, his carefully maintained neutrality that now seemed less like open-mindedness and more like indifference. All those times he said he wanted to look at things from both sides, wasn't that just another way of saying he didn't care enough to choose? Karen? Lisa's voice snapped me out of my thoughts. You're being awfully quiet. What's Jake's stance on all this? I felt my face flush with a mix of embarrassment and anger. Oh, you know Jake, I said, trying to sound steady. He likes to vote based on his own logic. The words left a bitter taste in my mouth. Emily snorted. Typical. They think they can just sit out while we lose our rights. Well, maybe it's time they learned otherwise. By the time I left Lisa's house, something in me had changed. The frustration I'd felt before had solidified into a determined resolve. Jake's so-called neutrality wasn't just frustrating anymore, it was part of the problem. If he couldn't see that, then maybe it was time for him to understand that his lack of action had real consequences. Walking home, I thought about Sarah's story, about Rachel's strike. Maybe that wasn't such a crazy idea after all. If Jake wanted to stay neutral on issues that directly impacted my life, why should I pretend everything was fine between us? My steps grew more certain as I approached our apartment. The time for patience was over. If Jake thought he could keep sitting on the sidelines while women like me fought for our rights, he was about to be proven wrong. This wasn't just about politics anymore. It was about standing up for what was right, and I was done settling for anything less. Hey everyone, Jake here. I was unwinding after a long day at work, halfway through reheating some leftovers, when Karen stormed through the door. One look at her face, and I could tell something was different. That same intensity from this morning was still there, but now it had hardened into something else. Hey, I greeted cautiously, testing the waters. How was your day with the girls? Karen dropped her bag onto the counter with more force than usual. Oh, it was enlightening, she replied, her tone tense. We had a very good talk about why we lost the election. I turned away from the microwave to face her. Karen, you know I voted. We discussed the issues, and I made the choice I thought was best for... That's exactly the problem, she interrupted, her voice rising. You and all these other men making your rational decisions while our lives are on the line. I felt my own frustration rising but tried to keep my tone calm. Wait, are you saying I shouldn't think through my choices, that I should just automatically vote the way you want? Don't twist my words, Karen snapped, starting to pace around the small kitchen. I'm saying that if you truly understood what's at stake, if you really cared about women's rights, there's no way you'd have voted the way you did. The microwave beeped, but neither of us moved to open it, and the scent of reheated pasta filled the room as we stood, locked in an increasingly tense standoff. Karen, I said slowly, choosing my words with care, I respect your passion. You know I support your right to stand up for what matters to you, but I also have the right to examine the issues and candidates and make my own informed choices. She laughed, but it wasn't her usual warm laugh. It was bitter, almost mocking. Informed choices. Is that what you call it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you and every other man who voted against us simply don't care about women's issues. That's not fair, I countered, feeling my calm exterior beginning to crumble. You can't dismiss everyone who disagrees as uncaring. There are complex economic and social factors at play, and reasonable people can view the same facts and come to different conclusions. Oh, spare me the logical male analysis, Karen retorted, her voice dripping with sarcasm. This isn't an academic debate, Jake. This is real life, and your so-called reasonable vote has real consequences for women like me. I watched as she stormed around the kitchen, pulling out a glass and filling it with water, her hands trembling. The woman I'd fallen for, who used to love discussing politics and social issues with me, seemed replaced by someone who saw any disagreement as a personal betrayal. The girls helped me see things clearly today, she continued, her tone quieter, but still intense. Men like you, hiding behind words like rational and reasonable, you're part of the problem. Your vote against our principles shows exactly where your priorities lie. Karen, come on. I tried again. We used to be able to talk about this stuff, remember? We could disagree without it meaning one of us was wrong. She turned to me, her eyes blazing. That was before I realized how deep this goes. It's not just one vote or one election. It's about men thinking they know better about women's issues than women themselves. And you, she pointed at me, accusingly, you're proving my point right now with your reasonable defense of voting against women's interests. I felt a deep weariness settle over me. The pasta in the microwave was probably cold again, but I'd lost my appetite anyway. Karen disappeared into our bedroom, slamming the door behind her, leaving me standing alone in the kitchen. I couldn't help but wonder how we'd gone from being partners who respected each other's thoughtful differences to this, where my careful consideration of the issues now seemed like evidence of betrayal. And the worst part was, I knew this wasn't just a one-time argument. Something fundamental had shifted in our relationship, and I wasn't sure we could come back from it. The silence in our apartment has become suffocating. It's been a week since our argument, and Jake seems to think everything should go back to normal. He just doesn't understand. There is no normal anymore. Not after he chose to vote against our interests, claiming he'd thought it through carefully. Last night, I lay in bed beside him, feeling miles away even though we were only inches apart. And then it hit me. Why should I pretend everything's fine when I'm 5 stories under the ground and completely brain damaged? Why should I act like his choice didn't matter? Lisa's words from our group chat kept echoing in my head. Actions have consequences. Morning light filters through the bedroom window as I make my decision. Jake's in the kitchen making his usual weekend breakfast, like it's just another Saturday. I need to talk to you, I announce, walking into the kitchen. He looks up, spatula in hand, with that maddeningly calm expression. I've been thinking about our situation, I begin. Karen, if this is about the election again. No, I interrupt. This is about us. I straighten my shoulders, drawing on the strength I feel when I'm with my activist friends. I've decided I'm going on strike. He pauses mid-flip, the spatula frozen in the air. A strike? What are you talking about? A sex strike, I state firmly, watching his face shift from confusion to shock. Until men like you understand that your actions have real consequences for women. Jake sets down the spatula slowly. So, let me get this straight. You're withholding physical intimacy as punishment for voting according to my own judgment. Don't make it sound manipulative, I snap. This is about standing up for my values. If you can vote against women's interests, then I can withhold my participation in this relationship. This is absurd, he mutters, turning back to the stove as the smell of something burning fills the air. You can't just... I can, and I am, I reply, my voice steadier than I expected. Maybe this will make you understand how serious this is. He scrapes the burnt food into the trash, his movements sharp with irritation. Karen, relationships aren't supposed to be about punishment and control. This isn't healthy. You know what's not healthy? I feel the anger building inside me. Men thinking they can make choices that impact women's lives without facing any consequences. The kitchen falls silent, save for the soft sizzle of the cooling pan. Jake braces his hands on the counter, his back to me, and when he finally speaks, his voice is tight with restrained emotion. So, this is your solution. Using our relationship as a weapon. I'm using the power I have to make a point, I reply, though something about his words unsettles me. I push the feeling aside. The girls think it's brave. The girls, he repeats, turning to face me, and I can see something different in his eyes, not just hurt, but disappointment. So this was all their idea? They helped you see things clearly? I lifted my chin defiantly. Rachel's been doing this for 2 weeks and her husband's already starting to change his mind. Jake's laugh was hollow. Signs of changing his mind or signs of resentment. You can be as sarcastic as you want, I shot back, turning to leave the kitchen. But this isn't a joke to me. I'm serious about this strike. If you truly care about understanding women's perspectives, maybe you'll finally start paying attention. I headed toward the living room, my heart racing, but my resolve unshaken. Behind me, I heard Jake dump the leftover dosa batter down the drain and slam the pan into the sink. The loud noise made me flinch, but I stood firm. He needed to understand that his choices, his vote, his relentless defense of his rights, decision, all had consequences. If this strike was what it took to make him see that, then so be it. It's been days of this absurd strike, and I'm done. I'm finished walking on eggshells in my own home, tired of the cold shoulders and self-righteous lectures. I want this settled right now. Karen's on the couch, scrolling through her phone, probably soaking up validation from her echo chamber of friends. Seeing her there, acting like some noble warrior for justice, made my blood boil. We need to talk, I said, my voice harder than I'd ever used with her. She looked up, startled by my tone. Actually, no, you need to listen for once, Jake. I'm not interested in I don't care what you're interested in, the words burst out of me. For weeks, you've treated me like the enemy, just because I dared to think for myself, because I had the audacity to weigh the candidates' entire platforms instead of blindly voting as you demanded. She sat up straighter, the usual righteous anger flashing in her eyes. If you would just try to understand. Understand what? I interrupted again. That you think it's okay to weaponize intimacy? That you and your friends believe manipulation is justified as long as it serves your cause? I laughed bitterly. The irony here is incredible. You claim to be fighting for equality and freedom of choice, all while trying to control and punish anyone who thinks differently than you. This isn't about punishment, she began, but I wasn't finished. The hell it isn't. You're literally withholding intimacy to punish me for making my own decisions. Do you have any idea how toxic that is? I started pacing, letting out weeks of pent-up frustration. And the worst part, you don't even see how you've become exactly what you claim to be fighting against, a person who controls others through coercion and shame. Corinne jumped to her feet, her face flushed with anger. How dare you compare? How dare I? How dare you? You've turned our relationship into a battleground where every disagreement is treated like a betrayal and every independent thought is an offense. I stopped pacing and faced her. So, tell me, Karen, what's your goal here? How long are you planning to keep this up? She raised her chin defiantly. Until we change the world and men understand women's power. The sheer arrogance of her words stunned me for a moment, and then something snapped inside. Change the world? You can't even handle the idea of someone you love having different political views. You're not changing the world, you're just burning down our relationship to prove some twisted point. It's not twisted to stand up for what's right, she shouted back. No, but it is twisted to think you can bully someone into sharing your beliefs, to think your view is so superior that anyone who disagrees must be evil or ignorant, I continued. Do you want to know what I've realized? You don't want a partner, you want a puppet, who'll vote as you say and think as you do. A heavy silence fell over the room. Karen stood there, shock written across her face, perhaps hearing herself clearly for the first time. I voted based on careful thought, considering all issues, from economic to social and foreign policy, I said. I respect your right to disagree with my choice. But this, I gestured between us, this manipulative, controlling behavior, this isn't activism, it's not bravery, it's just emotional abuse dressed up as some moral stand. I never thought it would end like this. When Jake stormed into the living room that evening, something in his expression told me this wasn't going to be like our other arguments. The familiar space suddenly felt foreign, even hostile, as he stood there, radiating a level of anger I'd never seen before. "Your little strike ends today," he said, his tone carrying a finality that made my stomach twist. "Actually, everything ends today," he continued. I straightened up, ready to defend my principles, but he didn't give me the chance. "You talk about equality and freedom," he spat, pacing like a trapped animal. "But you've become exactly what you claim to despise. A dictator who can't tolerate any perspective but your own. You're not fighting for freedom, you're fighting for control." That's not true," I protested, though my own voice sounded weak even to me. "I'm standing up for what's right." "No, Karen, you're bullying anyone who dares to think differently from you." He stopped pacing and met my eyes with a hard stare. "Do you know what real equality means? It means understanding that in a democracy, sometimes your side loses. It means respecting that other people can look at the same facts and draw different conclusions." His words stung, but I wouldn't back down. "So we should just accept injustice? Just lie down and let it happen?" Enough with the scripted activist speeches. His shout made me flinch. "This isn't one of your rallies, Karen. This is real life, and you've turned our relationship into a war zone because you can't handle someone having their own mind." I watched in horror as he reached for my hand, his fingers finding the engagement ring he'd placed there just 8 months ago. The metal felt cold as he slid it off my finger. "Maybe you'll have to settle for a life with cats after all." His voice oozed with sarcasm, each word like a cut. "Go ahead and blame the world for not bending to your views." Something inside me cracked at his words, and all the righteous anger I'd been holding on to these past weeks came pouring out. "You think I care about a ring or the idea of living alone?" I shot back, my voice rising with hurt and defiance. "I'd rather stand by myself, true to my principles, than compromise them for someone who doesn't have the courage to stand up for what's right." Each word came sharper, fueled by a painful determination. "You call me bitter? At least I'm not a coward, hiding behind so-called rationality while the world falls apart around us. I'll keep fighting, Jake, with or without you, because unlike you, I actually believe in something." "Save the speech for your next rally," he interrupted, his tone chilling. "I want you out of here tonight." I stood there, trembling as his words sank in. This was really happening. All those years together, our shared dreams, everything unraveling over our different principles. For a split second, a small voice in my head wondered if maybe I'd pushed too far, if compromise was still possible. But then I thought of Lisa, the others, everything we'd been fighting for. No, I'd rather walk away with my head held high than stay with someone who could never understand what we were fighting for. Without a word, I turned to pack. Each item I tossed into my suitcase felt like one more nail in the coffin of our relationship. Photos of happier times stared back at me from the walls, but I couldn't bring myself to look. As I rolled my suitcase toward the door, Jake stood in the kitchen with his back to me. A part of me wanted him to turn around, to stop me, to say this was all just a mistake, but he didn't move, didn't say a word, and somehow that silence hurt more deeply than any goodbye could have. The door clicked shut behind me, a sound that felt horribly final. Standing in the hallway of what had been our home, I felt both empty and overwhelmed with emotion. I pulled out my phone, fingers shaking as I typed a message to Lisa. "It's over. Can I stay with you?" As I waited for her reply, I tried to reassure myself that all of this was worth it, that standing up for what I believed in was worth losing the man I'd thought I'd be with forever. But as the elevator descended, taking me away from everything we'd built together, I couldn't stop the tears from streaming down or quiet the nagging question in my mind. In fighting so hard for what I believed was right, had I somehow lost sight of everything else that truly mattered?